live. Let's get everybody on. All right, Lily's on. Okay, so just sent the message out. Should have a few more people joining us. See how people saw the message. Oh, Mariana. All right. So we normally average about 10 people. So I'm going to give it a minute. Today we're going to be talking about predictions, and then we're going to go on to um, let's see if I can do three reading standards today because we have almost the entire time. And I think that the predictions we're going to get through very well. Text with related graphic information and text with opposing arguments. Those are going to be your bread and butter for informational text. That's how they're going to test your reading comprehension. So I really want to hit that um, before we finish. The prediction shouldn't be too long. I just like to talk about reading predictively so that we can spend less time on the reading questions, right? So if we're reading predictively, then we kind of have an idea of where things are going to go. You're probably going to be able to guess what the question is going to be as you're reading. So Let's see. So looks like we normally would have Sam, so Sam would need to join us. Alma, um, Diane says she should be here today. Sorry, still reaching out to a few more people. Okay. And while we have everybody here and we're waiting for everybody else to join, I've noticed that we have about three people that have been spending quality time on Aztec. So I'm going to preach that again. So we need to have everyone who logs on to go on to Aztec. I try to give you guys as much time as I can every day to log on. So let's make sure that we lead in that as well. We will have the most people who pass the test. And I want to lead in everything. So we need to have more people using Aztec. Feel free to save the questions. Let me know when we meet again what your questions are. We're going to be hitting more writing standards with reading as well. I just wanted to hit the basics in reading, the things you're going to see the most, which is informational text. But you probably will struggle the most with fiction. All right, Sam has joined us. Joined us. No, no, no worries. I'm glad that you're here. I'm just gonna give a few people the chance to join. Okay, we should have Amma joining us. Okay, we're gonna go on and get started. So again, I'm not gonna start preaching this until we get everybody on there. We need time on Aztec. Okay, I'm using the high set prep book so that everything that we're doing is directly related to the test. But the nice thing about Aztec is that those are all the things that you yourself have struggled in. And if you're getting a 40% in some of the areas or better, some of the different standards, that's a passing score for the high set task C or GED. So it's worthwhile to get in there, spend some quality time. If you have questions, take a screenshot. There's some things in the book that I don't like the way that they structure it. Like I don't like the way the book does writing, mostly because you're probably going to get a persuasive essay, and there's only two or three complex sentences that you really need. All right. Most of it, unless you guys are taking the GED, which I know most of you will not take the GED, it's going to have to be created. It's going to have to be corrected by a person, and a person is going to be looking for certain things. So that's why we do that. I have a few people. Okay. I can guarantee there's going to be questions here. We're going to be using Class Kick. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be a little philosophical, meaning that it's not going to be as black and white as what you're used to seeing with nonfiction informational texts. But it's still important that when we're reading, we're trying to predict. All right. So I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we predict when we're reading fiction, and then we're going to talk about how to read predictively when we're talking about nonfiction. So while we're doing that, in the live chat, send me a message with all of the elements of a fiction story, right? You have the exposition, and there's a few more. And if you don't remember, you don't know, please send me a question mark. Oh, okay. So this is why I like using the conference call because no one's responded yet. Good morning. Okay. So you know what? Let's go ahead and use the conference call feature so that you understand what I am talking about. There we go. So, exposition, rising action, climax. What else? And I'm not hearing from other people, so we're definitely going to have to do something else. Okay. All right. So please call into. Okay. So it's the falling action and then the resolution. Okay. So please join the conference call.
Joining the conference now. You are currently the only person in this conference.
All right. Who just joined us?
This is Tom.
All right, Tom. Perfect. Resolution. Thank you. Okay. So please join on because I'm going to be asking a lot of questions and I want everybody to have the ability to answer. Again, this is not a podcast, although I do podcasts, but not this is not a podcast. So I want to make sure everybody's participating. Who just joined us? Andre? Okay.
Morning, Gil is here.
All right. Okay, and who just joined us?
Hi, good morning, Mom. Alma.
Alma, and okay, sounds like somebody else is joining us as well.
Yes, good morning. This is Mariana.
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Mariana. Okay. So, right before we joined the conference call, we were talking about all of the elements of a fiction story because this is going to be important when it comes to predicting. So, what are all of the parts of a fiction story? All of the elements. Okay. So,
What is the question? I can't hear.
perfect. Okay. Yes. So, what are the elements of a fiction story? So, remember how we talked about the fact that all fiction stories have to have a theme and they have to follow a certain pattern, right? We call those plot elements. It has to follow a certain pattern whenever we're telling a story.
So the elements they have plot,
Yes, plot.
theme.
Okay. So plot is what happens in the story. Theme is the lesson, right? But whenever think about like movies, think about books that you've read that are fiction, they all start in a very particular way. So what do we call the very beginning where they're introducing the characters, you find out what the setting is, and Sam, you actually named it in the chat box. What is that called?
Okay, and the other one is setting, I think. Setting.
Yeah, the setting and the characters, all of that belongs in what? And you gave us the name in the chat box. Starts with an E.
So literature.
It is literature. The beginning of any fiction story.
Rising.
What's that?
Rising action and falling action.
Correct. You're going to have the exposition. That's the beginning of any story. This is really important. Remember how confused we got when they just gave us like random parts? The exposition is always the beginning. This will be on the test. This is one of the standards of fiction.
Yep.
And when we're talking about predicting, go ahead.
So that is in the plot. Plot it has
correct
exposition.
Yep. And what's next?
Rising action.
There we go. Here.
The climax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on the top one, and then
Yep.
falling action,
Yep.
and ending is a
Resolution. Okay.
resolution,
Perfect. So
resolution.
perfect. Exposition. This is where we get to know the setting
The yeah,
and the
got it.
characters. I can almost guarantee you, they're never going to give you this when you test. They're going to either start you off here in the rising action where we find out what the problem is, or they're going to give you the climax where the main character is going to come face to face with the problem.
What is the climate? Main character?
Comes face to face with the problem.
I can oh face to face.
Mm-hmm.
Is this only for fiction or nonfiction as well?
If you could have an actual story, like a nonfiction story, and even when you have a nonfiction story, they're gonna like force it to come into this. Like when you watch reality TV, they still follow this. Does that make sense? So even though it's nonfiction, they like formulate it in a way where it hits all of this because if they didn't, it wouldn't make any sense, right? It's like if you were to have a movie about Thomas Edison, right? Thomas Edison did a lot of things that probably wouldn't fit into this. Like he invented the electric chair and he did it to be competitive and put other people out of business. And he would torture animals. You can actually still find it on YouTube. So all the other crazy things he did, putting people out of business, being greedy. If you saw a movie about his life, they're gonna make the facts fit all of this. So anytime a story is told, it's going to follow this, even when it's nonfiction, because this is the way we're used to seeing things. We want a certain kind of drama, and we want things to end in a way that makes sense, so that it has some kind of message. And when it doesn't have that, uh, then we end up getting upset because we're like, "What was the point of the movie?" This is important for us to understand because when we're reading, we know we only have like an hour and a half. We know they're going to take some of these things away from us. So either we're not going to get any introduction to the characters, like what we had with the case of the bird, where they're just telling you they're in court, and you have to understand by who the people are that they're in court. You have to understand by what they're saying who the characters are. And a lot of you guys found that difficult. And that's important because we're going to spend more time rereading the text, and then you end up getting yourself in trouble. So we have to be able to predict. So if they don't give us the exposition, and they really didn't even give us the falling action, they didn't even tell us how the story ends. All we got was the fact that they were in court, right? Man versus society, and that they're trying to figure out who killed the man and who killed the bird. That was it. All of these other things you had to predict or you had to infer, right? That's why it's important that we understand all of these elements because that's going to be common. It's not likely that you're going to get it's not very likely you're going to get complete stories. You're going to get excerpts. You're going to get bits and pieces of this from fiction. Question so far?
No question.
No question. No question.
Okay. All right. So now we're going to talk about how we use this when we're reading. So when we're reading, if you know that they're not talking about, if you know they haven't given you characters, you're just starting off with the problem. Think about who the characters are and what that says about the setting. Like, where is the story taking place? If they give you the problem, think about how the problem has to be fixed, right? If you're in a courtroom because somebody was killed, then you know that the resolution would be in a perfect world that the person who did it goes to jail or goes to prison. They get punished. So this is how when you're reading, you should be writing out to the side, predicting what's probably going to happen, right? So that's when you're doing it for fiction. We also need to read predictively for nonfiction. And this is going to be a little harder because you're not always going to have a lot of background knowledge on what you're reading. So you have to infer what the author's trying to prove. And what you're going to look for is a thesis. There's a couple of things that you have to do right off the bat when you're reading nonfiction. First thing I'm going to look for is the thesis. You're going to have this when you're writing, and there's almost always going to be this in any type of nonfiction writing. The thesis is what they're trying to prove, right? It's what the whole essay, the whole text is going to be about. Okay. So they're going to tell you, like, these are the steps to recycle. This is why organic food is better for you, right? So this is the first thing you're going to look for. If you find this, it'll help you understand what they're probably going to say, and it's going to help you understand what the questions are going to be. All right. So that's the first thing. Okay. Now, the other thing you need to think about so you can predict effectively is the author's purpose. There's only 3 reasons that people write, and we're going to use the acronym PIE. People write to persuade, to inform, and to entertain. So as you're reading, think about what the whole text is about. There's usually going to be 1 or 2 sentences that tell you what the whole text is going to be about. And then think about the author's purpose. Are they trying to persuade, inform, or entertain? If you understand what they're trying to do, you can, again, predict. You'll probably even know exactly what the question is going to be because you know they're trying to persuade you to do something, or they're trying to help you understand what a process is, or they're trying to entertain you. And if they're trying to entertain you, you know what the plot elements are going to be, right? You know the pattern they're going to follow. Questions on that so far?
No.
Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a link. It's going to be a link we've used before. And we're going to work on predicting. You're only going to have 2 questions, and you're going to have 3 paragraphs. So I'm going to start the timer. But again, we know we only have an hour and a half on the real test, and you're going to have something like 40 questions. So it's important that we work effectively. These paragraphs and the questions you're looking at should not take you 25, 30 minutes. So I would like for us to finish this somewhere in the like 5 to 7 minute range. I know we're starting, so it's not necessarily going to be easy, or we're not going to get it the first time around, but that's the goal, right? Because if they only give us 65 minutes and we end up taking 15, right? We're close to a fifth of our time just kind of going to that. So I'm going to share the link in the live chat. It's the same link we've been using for the effectiveness of an argument. I'm just going to post it again in case people lost it. Right, so that's posted. And we're going to be working on the very last page. I just added it right now. And we're going to be working on that one. It's called the Consequences of the Green Revolution. As soon as I see that the time is, as soon as I see everybody has logged on, the time will start. All right, so I see Alma, Ildi, Mariana. I see Sam. I do not see Andre. Okay. All right. So we got everybody in. It's the very last page, page 11. I'm starting the timer now. And as soon as you are done reading, and again, there should be notes, highlights, you should be predicting, looking for that thesis, the author's purpose, then we will stop. All right, time starts now.
Different water, please.
Yes.
Is this proxy number 10?
It's practice 10. Yep, correct.
Okay, consequence of the Grand Revolution.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We're now 4 minutes in. We're about 7 minutes in, and I just added another section. But don't worry about that new page I just added. Okay, so Alma, you just finished? 8 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, nice. 8 minutes in. And your answers were correct. Please don't share your answers. But okay. It's like Andre. You're done. 9 minutes in. Nice. Um, I didn't see that you had taken any notes on it. That's going to be helpful because you're going to get more than two questions when you take the actual test. Okay. So then Illy, 9 minutes and 55 seconds. Mariana, ¿qué pasó? Are you still on? Are you still with us?
Eh, sí, perdón, tuve que dejarlos por unos minutitos, pero ya regresé.
Okay. Okay, so I'm finished. 11 minutes in. Okay, so let's go ahead and go over this together. So I'm gonna briefly read the passage, and then we will look at the questions. And again, I'm gonna write out what stands out to me as I read, so that we get some practice with how to read predictably. Right? I did see a lot of people highlighting, writing notes out to the side, and the vast majority of us got this right. So almost everybody did well. The Green Revolution, and I'm actually going to time myself as well. So the average time was about 9 minutes, and that's good, right? So yeah, three paragraphs. So taking about what, a minute on each paragraph, and then about 3.5 minutes on each question. That's not bad pace necessarily for the test. See how long it takes us to go over it together. The Green Revolution took place primarily in the 1960s when the introduction of a number of technologies made farming much more productive. The effect was the most dramatic in the developing world. Okay, so I'm thinking that the whole thesis here, what they're really trying to, what this whole thing is going to be about, is how technology in the 1960s made farming more productive. So thesis, technology in the 1960s made farming more productive. Okay. The Green Revolution is credited with saving a billion people from starving. Okay, so because of the revolution, they save people from starving. I would highlight that. It permanently changed the world's economic and social dynamic. Hmm. So I would say that we may have a tough time understanding that. So I know that it's helping people. I know that people are now not starving, right? And if you can make more food, that's going to be beneficial to everybody. So even if I didn't really understand what economic or social dynamic means, I know it's helping people. So I might even highlight those words, right? Economic and social dynamic. I mean, I don't know what those words mean, but I can infer that this is helping people. Leave it there. Giving people in poor countries the opportunity to grow enough food to feed themselves. However, this dramatic improvement in living conditions has come at a substantial cost, especially to the environment. Oh, okay. So, yes, it made farming better, but now they're also saying that it hurts the environment. So, I bet you, if I had to predict, I'm going to predict that they're going to tell us how it hurts the environment and maybe like a way to fix it. Uh, and that even though it's helping people, it's not as beneficial because we're losing the environment. So then they're going to talk about helping people but hurting the environment and then like a solution. So far, we're 2 minutes in. Many technological improvements led to the green revolution. Okay, so this green revolution must mean when the technology became better. I would write that out. One such improvement was the development of chemicals that killed insects, pesticides, and weeds, herbicides. These pesticides and herbicides increased crop yields. Okay, so the pesticides and herbicides, they increase how much we got from the crops. Okay, I can guarantee you that's going to be bad. Why? I have a little bit of knowledge on that, but even if I didn't, I know that whatever they were using to make more food is hurting the environment. So that has to be the herbicides and pesticides. These pesticides and herbicides increase crop yields. However, their toxic effects spread beyond their target species, affecting helpful animals and plants and even humans themselves. For example, the pesticide DDT caused serious harm to birds and has been banned for routine agricultural use in many countries. In addition, a number of studies have linked long-term exposure to agricultural chemicals to increased risk of cancer in humans. Okay, so kind of like what we thought, right? It's hurting, it's not helping the environment. Thus, one cannot pronounce the Green Revolution in unqualified success. Furthermore, when evaluating the impact of new technologies, sounds to me like they're trying to give us a solution. It's important to identify and assess their unintended effects as well as their intended ones, right? So they're kind of telling us, you look at what you're going to do and what you want to accomplish, and then what could happen that you didn't plan for. That took 4 minutes, right? So let's look at question A. If the author were to add a new paragraph to this passage just before the last paragraph, how would that paragraph most logically begin? Okay, so if you look at the last paragraph, thus one cannot pronounce the Green Revolution an unqualified success. Furthermore, when evaluating the impact of new technologies, it is important to identify and assess their unintended effects as well as their intended ones. Okay, so they're going to add in one right before that. Well, what were they doing with that last paragraph? Like, what were they trying to prove? What was the point of the last paragraph? Somebody answer that from the conference call, live chat. What are they trying to do with that last paragraph?
To convince us.
Convince us of what? You're exactly right. They are trying to convince us.
Whether pesticides are a good thing or not.
Oh, okay. So the pesticides did help us get more food. So the pesticides were good for food, but what were they bad for in other ways?
Harmful, the health conditions.
Yeah, they're harmful to humans and they're harmful to animals that help us, right? And that's kind of what they're saying in the end is that Sometimes you have to think about the other things you're going to get when you do something, even if that's not what you are trying to do, right? So now that we have that in mind, let's look at what's going to end up making the most sense. So let's look at A. However, there is no definitive evidence that agricultural chemicals are using the collapse of bee colonies, a phenomenon that remains a mystery. What does that have to do with harmful? What does that have to do with herbicides, pesticides, farming? Is that anything that would support the idea that we should be careful of herbicides and pesticides, even though it gives everyone more food? Does that help us at all? A?
No,
No.
no, no.
Yeah. Let's look at B. On the other hand, climate change is a far more serious environmental problem and deserves greater attention. Well, is this about climate change or about the fact that the things that we're using to grow crops are bad for animals and the environment?
It's not about campaign.
It's not, right? This isn't about like, there we go, good, right? So it's not about like greenhouse effects and trashing the ocean and all that other stuff. And it's really about how these chemicals that make us give us more food hurt the animals. So nobody should have put B. Let's look at D. The human population growth fostered in part by the Green Revolution has resulted in some societies having a large proportion of children and young adults. Was that any part of their
No.
thesis? Is that what they were
No.
trying to prove?
No.
No. In
No.
fact,
No.
they never even talked about young people
No.
or older people. They talked about people eating, period, right? People not living in poverty. So the answer would be C. Moreover, harmful insects and weeds develop resistance to agricultural chemicals over time, forcing farmers to purchase more expensive and more toxic treatments. So that would make sense because then you can back it up with this is why it's not a success, even though people have food, because the chemicals we use to keep the food preserved becomes more toxic and expensive, right? Any questions about number one?
No question.
No. No.
No,
question.
no. All right,
Question.
good.
No question.
Let's move on to number two. If asked to evaluate the use of genetically modified organisms in agriculture, which statement would the author be most likely to agree? Okay. So I'm interested here. So when they talk about genetically modified organisms, what is that? Can someone explain to me what genetically modified organisms are?
Full of chemicals, not natural.
Okay, so chemicals that are harmful. Okay. Do I have to know exactly what genetically modified organisms are?
No.
Not necessarily, right? So there's a couple of things I can use here because we're not going to know all the terms. I can infer that genetics deals with your genes, what makes you you. And modified must mean that we're changing it. So like we're changing something, like we're changing either the way the food is made or we're changing like what the food produces, right? Agriculture means farming. Okay. And in fact, when we get more into word choice, we're going to look at all the Greek and Latin roots. So when you come across a word you don't know, you can go to the Greek and Latin root to get a good idea of what the word means. So basically, they're saying if they find a way to like change these fruits, vegetables, the way that they do things in farming by modifying things, would the author agree or disagree with the following statements? Like, which one is the author most likely to agree with, right? So let's look at D. If genetically modified organisms are likely to harm the environment but help people, then farmers should use the technology. Does that make any sense based off what the author was talking about? Does D make any sense?
No.
Everybody else, that was Alma and Mariana and
No,
Ildi.
no.
Okay, why not? Why not?
But because in this option, the embodiment will be hot. I don't know.
Okay, so we know here that the author's saying, hey, we gave people more food, but the things we use to get more food hurts the environment, right? So was the author trying to entertain us, inform us, or persuade us? Let's start there. Yeah.
Inform us.
Yeah, they're trying to inform us of the bad effects of the pesticides and herbicides, right? They kind of offer a solution, but for the most part, it's informing. I guess you could maybe argue they're trying to persuade, but for the most part, they're trying to inform, right? They don't really offer like a detailed answer. They just say, hey, think about what you do. So they're not really talking about how if it helps people, we should do it no matter what. In fact, the author says that if it helps people, but it hurts the environment, we got to figure something else out. So D is not going to work. That's not what the author was trying to inform us of. Let's look at C. If genetically modified organisms will help farmers feed more people, thereby preventing starvation, then they should be used. What's the difference between C and D?
The difference between C and D is we use a modified organism will help, and then D are likely to harm the environment.
You know, if we really look at it closely, C and D are pretty much saying the same thing. That
They say no matter what, it should be used.
yeah, even if it hurts other things that are not people, if it feeds us, it should be okay. So if D is wrong, then C is also wrong.
Oh.
Right? Because if you look at it, genetically modified organisms will help farmers feed more people, thereby preventing starvation. Then they should be used.
Okay.
Right? Well, that's the same thing they said in D. Was if they're likely to harm the environment but help people, then we should use them. It's the same thing, right? So we know it's going to be between A and B. So let's look at A. History shows that new technologies have negative consequences. So genetically modified organisms should not be used in farming. That could sound like something the author would support, right? Because the author keeps saying that we got to think about what happens when you want one thing and you might get something else out of it, right? So it sounds like it's A. Let's look at B as well. Like other new technologies, genetically modified organisms may have negative consequences as well as positive ones. And it is important to take all effects into account. Well, that sounds more like what the author would say, because the author doesn't say we shouldn't use herbicides or pesticides. The author just says that they're bad for people. They're bad for the environment, and we got to think about what we're doing with them. So B would be the answer for number 2, because that's the same thing the author has been informing us, right? You got to think about the good things that you want and some of the bad things that can happen when you go after the good ones. Questions so far?
No question.
No questions?
No question.
No question.
Okay. So as I went through, almost everybody nailed it. The only thing I would want to improve is taking down the amount of time that we spent reading and answering the questions. I know that for some of us, English is not our first language, and we may not read for pleasure. Or if we do read for pleasure, we're not reading it in English. But it's important that we practice. We have to continue to read so that we can read efficiently. I can't tell you how many students have complained to me about running out of time, right? That's why I'm always timing, and we're looking at how fast we answer, because I don't want to get us into a situation where you're doing well, but then you run out of time. So if you're in that 8, 9 minute mark, not too bad, but I would say like 7 minutes would be ideal. All right. So if there are no questions, we're going to talk about opposing arguments. This is going to be important for your essay. So I'm going to talk about some key points, then we're going to jump right into it. So we're going to hit a couple of standards. Today, the goal is to hit 3 reading standards. And if we have time, maybe I'll throw in a few writing. Monday, we're going to start talking about writings and 4 different types of writing. Some what an independent clause is, a dependent clause, the different types of commas we can use, and semicolons, so we can bone up on our writing. Okay. So one of the versions of writing is going to be persuasive writing, right? When you're trying to persuade, okay? When you see 2 different arguments, that's exactly what they're trying to do. So when you see 2 different arguments, they want to persuade you. Okay? 2 different arguments. Now, what you're going to do today is just look at the arguments and see if you understand what they're saying, and you're going to pick something that makes sense based off what they said, and look at the points they proved and see what point goes in line with a particular like question or particular phrase, right? So you're going to look at those 2 different arguments, you're going to analyze them. Now, where this is going to be the most important is for your essay, right? So you're going to read an essay that's going to try to persuade you. They're going to have 2 different arguments. As you read, and this is a great place to practice, pick an argument you can defend. Get in the habit. When you see 2 arguments, even if you don't have to write an essay, this is a great way to practice it, because you eventually will have to write an essay. Pick an argument you agree with. You agree and can defend. Oh, thank you. Okay. So some people are like, can I be in the middle? Can I be Switzerland? And no, you can't. You got to pick a side. Okay. Now, you know it's going to be a persuasive piece of writing when you have those 2 different arguments. Again, you have to write a whole essay about this. Don't pick something that you don't really understand or you don't really agree with. Pick things that have, like we talked about before, that have studies behind them, data, right? You're probably going to get a lot of this. If it doesn't have studies, it doesn't have data, it doesn't have any of that, go with examples and logic that you understand and that you can defend, right? The argument you're going to be reading here doesn't really have a lot of studies and data. It's going to be a lot more about examples and logic, right? And this is where you're going to get your chance to practice. Underline those examples, critique them, look at their logic, critique it. We talked about faulty reasoning, we talked about fallacies, right? So as we're reading, you know they're trying to persuade you. Look at the different arguments, look at their examples, look at their logic. There's not going to be a lot of data, numbers, studies, and stuff like that here. But that doesn't mean you don't break down their logic and see if it makes sense, right? So this is what we're doing today. Looking at persuasive writing, 2 different arguments, and you need to break everything down. We're not talking about an essay in detail today, but all of this will play into an essay that you will write. Questions so far?
No question.
No question. No question.
Questions?
No question.
Okay. All right. So If you go back to Class Kick, you're going to see another assignment on page 12. Same thing. This one is going to have two opposing arguments, and it's about movies and the rating system. One thing I'm going to caution you, if you pick a side and you think one side made a better point, remember, we're not writing an essay. That's just your opinion. When you're answering the questions, just look at what each person was trying to prove, right? Not who you necessarily agree with, because you don't have to pick a side for now. But you do need to look at what each person is trying to prove, okay? Later on, when we start getting into the essay, you will need to pick a side and you will need to defend that side. So if you go to the very last page, and once I see everybody on there, I'll go ahead and let us get started. So remember, it's page 12. Okay, so looks like everybody's on. I will start the timer now.
I'm done.
All right. 5 minutes in. Nice. 2 paragraphs, 4 questions.
I'm done.
5 minutes and
done.
42 seconds in. 5 minutes and 45 seconds in. See, this is exactly where we want to be. So waiting on, looks like a few of our friends. Okay. Okay, so now Alma's still working.
I'm done.
All right, 8 minutes. Not bad. Okay, so is anybody else still working? I think that might have been everybody.
I'm still working, but you can go on.
No. Take your time. Take your time.
I'm kind of
And that's all right. That's all right. Struggle through it because now you know, for example, if you're testing and you're looking at something and you know it's going to take you longer, then you know how to pace out the rest of what you're working on, right? Because the last one, you finished it fairly fast. So that's okay. This is where you get to see how you test, how much time you take. As I'm going through, it looks like number 2 and number 4 are the ones that everyone has a question on or struggled with. Very nice job with your notes, Mariana. Love it. And wow, okay.
Thank you.
Very welcome. We'll give Sam a few more minutes, then we're going to go over it. And then we're going to shoot for another standard.
Okay, you can go over it.
Okay, so and I wish there was a way. I need to find a way to share my screen because um, okay,
I want to see.
yeah, because so we understand counter arguments, but I really like what Mariana did. Mariana took notes in her own language. She wrote them all in Spanish, and it was written all over the assignment, which is exactly what I look for. And in fact, her performance was flawless. Like she uh, did very very well. So that's one of the things I really want to push for everybody is to take notes in that fashion, really break down the text. So let's go ahead and go over this. And Mariana, I really want to hear from you, even if I have to translate what you're saying, because I really like the way that you set up your notes. So right off the bat, we know this is a text where we're going to have two different arguments, right? We broke down what makes an argument strong, the fact that when we're writing an essay, we have to pick a side. And even when we're not picking a side, we need to look for what we agree with, what makes sense. Are they using data, examples, right? So this is about the rating system for movies, right? So argue the first argument, which I would even write argument A above it, or argument number one, or whatever helps break that down. Rating systems for movies are beneficial. In 1968, the Motion Picture Association of America replaced the complicated morals based Hayes Code with the current user friendly MPAA rating system. This system is designed specifically to help parents decide whether a movie is appropriate for their child. Every parent in America knows what G, PG, PG 13, and R mean and can use these ratings to quickly judge suitability. Moreover, ratings now include descriptions that give even more information that parents can use to assess content and make wise movie viewing decisions for their children. MPAA ratings take the guesswork out of at least one aspect of parenting. So, what they're saying in that entire paragraph is that this makes it easier to be a parent because you know what's going to be in the movie, TV show, whatever that your child is watching, right? So we know that if that's one argument, the other argument is going to be the complete opposite, right? And the other argument, argument number two or B, Starts with opposing argument. Movie rating systems are a joke. Okay. A movie's MPAA rating, G, PG, PG 13, or R, is a familiar tag that parents in particular use to make fundamental decisions about family entertainment. Sadly, the rating system is more a marketing tool for the industry than a useful guide for parents. Consider that in the early 1980s, unknowing parents exposed their children to alarming gore and violence under the PG rating, prompting the creation of the PG 13 rating. The result is that now a movie that includes violence, drug use, gore, and sexual content can be marketed as a family friendly PG 13 experience. Parents are better off finding an unbiased source of realistic reviews than trusting the MPAA rating system. So, one argument is that the rating system makes it easier to be a parent. You quickly know what you're exposing your child to and whether you want to do that or not. And then the argument is saying that it's not realistic and they're constantly like adding stuff and it's not helpful, right? That you could go to a PG movie and you're still getting violence and sexual content, and that's not helpful as a parent. So this could be very similar to an essay you may have to write. They're going to ask you to pick a side and defend it, right? So just keep that in the back of your mind when we're going over this. This is very easily could turn into a persuasive essay. Okay. Question so far about either argument or what it would look like as an essay.
No question.
No question.
No, no. Okay, perfect. I know everybody's still
No
here.
question.
Perfect. Okay. So, number one, the topic of both passages, and the answer would be I'm not going to go over all of it because everyone here knows what topic is. The answer is C, the MPAA movie rating system. I didn't see anybody miss that. Okay. Number two, and this is the one that I saw pretty much everybody miss except for one person. Which of the following is the main point of the argument? Okay. So we know that when they're persuading, we're going to have two different arguments. All right. Now, this one I can tell can be a little confusing because they're not directly telling you if you're looking at the argument of the first text or the second text. So if you looking at the fact that they're calling it the main point of the argument, then you would have to understand that it's the first text. But I can see how that's confusing because they're both arguments. So they could do a better job of labeling it. So you're looking at just the first paragraph because they're talking about the argument. Which of the following is the main point of the argument? And the main point, what they're really trying to prove, is that it's a useful tool for parents. I know there was a lot of confusion on number two. So my understanding would be that maybe you don't know if they were talking about the first argument or the second argument, but I could be wrong. So what made number two so difficult?
So in number two, we look only on the first paragraph.
Correct. So see how they called it the main point of the argument and the first text is called the argument? They're only talking about that one. And I know that's confusing because one is called argument and the other one's called opposing argument. And that's confusing. So that's more of the fault of the way the question is worded than anything else. So you're probably like argument. Go ahead.
What's really confusing to me in this situation is that every point is mentioned, and I'm having a difficulty deciding which one. So it's not like something sticks out and be like, oh, this can't. So process of elimination isn't really working here for me.
Okay, so when you read the first argument, so you understood they were talking about the first argument when you answered this question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do you think that the author was trying to prove? What do you think they were trying to argue? We call that the thesis.
Well, when I did say,
I'm sorry?
we didn't know that we're doing the first
on.
Oh, when I circled my answers, they were looking at the first argument. So to me, it was clear that parents should not rely on the rating system because it's not reliable.
Oh, okay. So when you look at questions like this, there are two different arguments, and there's no proof of which one's right or wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you might agree more with the opposing argument, but the goal here is to really look at what people are saying, right? Now, when we're writing an essay, you have to do two things: look at what people are saying and pick a side that you believe is stronger, makes more sense. But here, we're kind of starting from the beginning, and we're just looking at what they're arguing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So for question number 2, all they want to know is what is the argument that is being made here, right? They're not asking you to evaluate which one makes more sense. They're just asking you if you understand what they're trying to prove.
Okay.
One question.
Go ahead.
I have a question number 2.
Yes.
According to the test, answer letter C and letter D and almost the same. Is this right?
Well, letter C is saying that you should look at
rating system is a useful tool for points. Okay. And the PG, PG-13 and R rating are familiar, easy to understand. It's almost the same.
Almost. The only difference is that they're at the argument is trying to convince you that it's easy to understand for parents. Because easy to understand is open, right? Like easy to understand for who? For kids, for parents, for movie directors. So the biggest difference between B and D is that B makes it obvious that we're talking about parents.
So B is
What's that?
The answer of question number 2.
Yes, and this is why a lot of lawyers, I would say most lawyers, and I have a lot of lawyer friends, they get their bachelor's degree in English because this is where you learn to argue the smallest of points, the smallest of things that make a difference, right? So you're exactly right, Andre. B and D are very similar. The difference is that B lets you know that it's for parents. And D just makes it sound like everyone will understand it. But that's not what the argument is. The argument isn't that everyone will understand it. The argument is that parents can make better decisions for their kids. And that's what makes B a better answer than D. That little difference of the parents.
I got it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome. Any other questions on number 2? Because I know that as I was looking through, a lot of us struggle with number 2.
No question.
No question.
no question.
Okay. All right, so let's look at number 3. And pretty much almost everybody smokes number 3. The writer of the opposing argument would agree with which of the following statements. So the first thing I would do for number 3 is I would think to myself, what is the opposing argument? What are they trying to prove in the other argument? And let's talk about that. What is the opposing argument? What are they saying? What is the opposing argument trying to prove?
It's a movie rating system.
The result is that now a movie that includes violence, drug use, gore, and sexual content can be marketed as a family-friendly PG-13 experience.
Correct.
I think this is not true.
Yeah, so you may disagree with that, right? But that's what they're trying to say. They're like, hey, you guys don't even know how to rate the movies better. What you think is PG is really like PG-13 because a parent's going to go to this movie thinking that it's a little strong but kid-friendly, and it has things that they wouldn't like drug use and violence, right? And that's what they're trying to prove. Doesn't mean we have to necessarily agree with it because they're not asking us to write an essay yet. They're just proving a point, right? So their point is that it's not helpful and it's not even realistic, that you should look at a bunch of different uh, reviews, right? In fact, the last sentence says parents are better off finding an unbiased source of realistic reviews than trusting the NPAA rating system, right? So they're saying that it's not realistic and that it's biased, like it's for one side, right? It's not just telling you exactly what's going on in the movie. So that's the argument. The rating system is off. So let's look at number 3 then. So parents overreacted to movie content in the 1980s. Does that have anything to do with the argument at all? No.
No.
B, the PG rating introduced a helpful distinction to the system. No. That's the exact opposite of what they're arguing, right? They're arguing that the fact they had to make PG-13 in their mind is a fact that the Motion Picture Association is garbage because they had to keep adding to it, right? It's not even good. It's not even realistic. That's their argument. So B is pretty much the exact opposite of what the opposing argument is saying. C, violence and drug use are examples of family-friendly movie content. Nobody should have put that, right? So it's really between A and D, although A, B, and C stand out. Nobody struggled with this one. The correct answer would be D. The MPAA rating system should not be trusted, right? We don't need to spend too much time on that. That was pretty straightforward. Number 4, people did struggle on. All right, so there were a lot of questions and people took a while on this one. Which of the following conclusions could be drawn about the writer of the argument? And again, here we go to inferring, here we go to predicting, right? So before we even get to the possible answers, what do we know, or what do we think we know? What can we infer about the author of the argument? What do they believe? How do they feel? And Mariana, I was looking at your notes. I would actually like you to answer this one because you wrote down what the main idea was, what the thesis was. So, what do we think we know about this person, like based off what we read about their views?
Okay, I think that the system is not trusted. So
No, the argument, not the opposing argument, the argument.
okay.
Estamos hablando de la persona que escribió que el sistema de clasificación de películas es un sistema que sirve.
Es un sistema que puede servir o que no sirve.
Que sí sirve.
Ok, estoy confundida. Me estás preguntando sobre...
Porque en la pregunta número 4...
o el principal.
Sí, porque en la pregunta número 4 nos están preguntando cuáles son las conclusiones que uno puede decidir de la persona que escribió que el sistema de clasificaciones de películas es un sistema bueno que sí sirve. Entonces tenemos que hacer una inferencia para ver como qué tipo de persona es y cómo esa persona piensa.
Okay. Okay,
Go ahead. Anybody?
Okay, so I think number 4 has something to do with number 2.
Correct.
We're looking at her argument.
Correct.
And since we picked B in number 2, I think the correct answer would be A in number 4.
Why?
So she's arguing that the rating system is a useful tool. She largely approves the rating system.
Yeah. Because the argument here is that this is going to make it so much easier to be a parent and take your kids to the movies, right? So this is a person who thinks that this is beneficial and they care about kids and they think that being a parent is hard, right? Even at the very last sentence, NPAA ratings take the guesswork out of at least one aspect of parenting. So they believe being a parent is hard and that this is a favor. That's one less thing you have to worry about. Right? So when we look at number 4, that's what we need to think about. This is a person who thinks that being a parent is hard and that the Motion Picture Association of America is doing you a favor by coming up with this system. And this is one that a lot of people did struggle on. And yes, the correct answer would be A, right? That she largely approves of the MPAA rating system as a guideline for parents, right? Because she thinks that it's hard enough to be a parent, and this is going to make it easier for movies, right? And let's see as I go through, because number 2 and number 4 were some of the most difficult ones that, and I think that just really had to do with the way they labeled whether it's an argument or whether it's an opposing argument. So let's see.
Okay. And then number 4, I found where I'm wrong.
Okay.
Yes. This is really better, the question.
Correct.
It's about the writing of the argument. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This
is my mistake.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's one of those things. This is why I like discussing every part of the test. I don't see them doing that to you on the actual test because that is confusing. They're both arguments, so it should be like argument A and argument B, not argument and then opposing argument, because that's kind of confusing. Right?
Sure. Yeah.
So, but yeah, you shouldn't see that. But I would say that if you do get a similar question on the high side, which again I don't think you will, but if you do, just pay very particular attention to what they're calling each text, right? Are they calling it an argument? Are they calling it a counter argument, an opposing argument? But I don't see them playing those games. I think they do this just to make it harder. So, yes, the answer would be that she largely approves of the MPA rating system. She is weary of how the MPAA rating system judges violent content in movies. No, because the author likes it. So it wouldn't be C. She believed that the Hays Code was detrimental to the movie industry. Well, no. She just doesn't like the complicated morals-based Hays Code, right? So she didn't like it because it was hard to understand, and it was more about whether the movie was like mean or nice or taught people good things, and that's not a place for any kind of code, right? So D could sound like it's right, but it's not about how bad the Hays Code was. She allows her children to watch movies rated PG, but not those rated PG-13. That has nothing to do with anything. All right, perfect. Any questions before we move on? We're going to hit 3 reading standards today. We've hit prediction, text with opposing arguments, and now we're going to do text with related graphic information. That's 3 reading standards. Anybody else? Go ahead.
No question.
Okay, no questions? Did somebody say they had a question? Sorry.
No question.
No? Okay. All right. So this is probably going to be the vast majority of your informational text questions. Most of your nonfiction text questions are going to come from this. Oh, where did I put my marker? marker. There we go. Okay. So we're going to talk about text with related graphic information. And this is going to sound a lot more complicated than it really is. Okay. Now, related graphic information, this is a fancy way of saying graphs, charts, right? Any way of looking at data. Any way of looking at data or information. Questions so far? Questions?
No question.
Okay. So when we talk about graphs and charts, we're looking at things like this, right? Like how much rain did we get in Las Vegas over the course of a week, right? So it could be something similar to what I'm writing up on the board, right? So this could be like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, okay? You still need to take notes on this. And the reason they're giving you a chart is the fact that you're probably not going to have any background knowledge on this. So they want to give you something they believe you don't know and see if you've learned from the chart and from the graph. Sorry, from the chart and from the text. So when you see a graph like this, I would still take notes on the graph, right? If here you are allowed, because of class kick, you can actually write on the graph. I don't see that happening on the test, but the test changes, so who knows? If you are not allowed to write on the graph in the actual text, on a separate sheet of paper, break down what you see on the graph, right? Oh, this graph is about how much rain landed in Las Vegas over a week. And let's say it's like 5:10 to 5:17, right? And that way you understand what you're looking at. For the practice question you're about to get, the chart, what you're looking at, you really need the text to understand it. It's going to be a little hard, but that's why this is what they turn to. Can you read something, get an image, a picture, an illustration, graph, chart, any way to show the information? Can you bring those two together? We call that synthesizing. Can you get it together in your head and then answer questions? This is going to be the vast majority of your nonfiction questions. So break the chart down. Also look at how the chart supports whatever the argument is in the text. Because if there's a chart, they're either trying to argue something or just inform you, right? So you got to look at how it supports it. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So if there are no questions, if you go back to Class Kick, you're going to see another page. And this will be the last one that we do for today. So you're going to see at page 13. Looks like everybody's over there except for Ildi. Okay, and Sam. Okay, so Ildi and Sam, if you're with us, please move to page 13. All right. So again, we want to try to stick to that about like 7 minute mark. Time starts the very last page for Sam, page 13. So you're on page 11 right now. So move over two more, and you'll be on page 13. Time starts now. And sure, as everybody's working, I understand that it's black and white, so I'm gonna fill in the graph on figure 2A because as I'm looking at it, it doesn't really show anything. So I'm gonna fill it in with color so you guys can see the difference because the other one does have, for the most part, the color it needs. All right, we're about 8 minutes in. Okay, so it looks like okay, 10 minutes in. Twelve minutes in.
I'm not sure if it's just me. I think
Yeah, I'm giving
having
you.
a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I was giving you some feedback. The computer's a little slow.
Uh,
Yeah, so when you come across those words, uh, you can highlight them here. The nice thing is you can highlight them in black so they go away. I would completely highlight it so that the word goes away and then try to infer what the word means. So when you think you understand what they're trying to say with that word, I would write whatever that word is above what you crossed out or on a separate sheet of paper. So we're going to use context clues.
okay.
Mm-hmm. 15 minutes in.
I think I'm done.
All right, 15 minutes, 10 seconds. And I know this one's a little harder because I actually follow politics pretty closely. But if you don't, I can understand it's a difficult concept because there's a lot of different terms and things that only exist in the world of politics. It's hard to have any kind of like background knowledge.
I'm done.
All right, almost 16 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably where when we do come across an article that we understand, that's why we want to be efficient because this one, you're going to get something similar to it, especially for informational, where you're literally reading and learning as you're reading. That's why notes are so important. So I'm not mad at anybody for this one taking so long, but just keep that in mind when you come across things that you do have a lot of background knowledge on, the texts that are shorter. You really want to use your time wisely with those, so that when you come across something like this, you can take additional time and not find yourself running out of time at the end. Andre, amazing job.
Thank you, Mr. Water.
Very welcome. Okay. And Alma, you're still working?
No, I finished.
Finished? Okay. All right. So that took us about 17 minutes. So I know this was again, this was a little difficult because we probably don't have a lot of background knowledge on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read, and I'm going to read it as though I don't follow politics, and I'm going to look at the graph as though I don't follow it either. I know that I had to color it in because it didn't copy over as well as I wanted. So I'm going to give you guys some test taking tools, right? Okay. Okay. So gerrymandering, an electoral advantage. Okay. So if I didn't follow any kind of political party or policies or anything like that, then I would say an electoral advantage. I'm not sure what that is, but sounds like an election. Can I see the word elect? Sorry, I got a message from another student. One moment, sorry. Here's how the message is. Okay. So I know we're talking about some kind of an election. So the term gerrymander is used to describe the process by which electoral districts are given curious shapes in order to favor the interests of the party in power of a state legislature. That's a lot. So here's where we're going to use our highlighting tools and our inferencing skills, right? So we know the term gerrymander. Okay. So that's going to be important. If I don't know what that word is, I would highlight it to a point where you can't see it. You can do that here. Yeah, black highlight. On the actual test, I don't know if they give you different colors, but I would highlight it, make it stand out so you know that you need to find out what this word means. So it's a process by which electoral districts. Okay. So I don't know exactly what they mean by electoral districts, but I know electoral sounds like election. So I know we're talking about office, like people running to be like a senator or the president or something like that, are given curious shapes in order to favor the interests of the party in power of a state legislature. Well, I definitely understand that there's two parties in this country, right? Maybe I don't understand what a state legislature is, but I know that gerrymandering now is when you're doing something that helps out one party, the party that's in power. Okay, so not exactly sure how they do that, but I'm starting to understand what gerrymandering is, right? So gerrymander, that's to do things that favor the party in power. Okay. State legislatures, I don't know what that is, right? I don't have a lot of background knowledge. So I just know that this is about people getting into office and that they're trying to do things to like keep power. Any questions on that so far?
No,
Questions?
No question.
no question.
Okay. Through this process, the governing political party, okay. Not exactly sure what they mean by that, but governing, I know that's like the government. So maybe it's like the party that is in the government at the time. Tailors the electoral map to group unfavorable neighborhoods into a few districts likely to vote for the opposition, while configuring the majority of districts to favor the party in power. That's a lot. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to break this down. Through this process, the governing party, okay, so the people in charge in the government, tailors, I don't know what they mean by tailors, the electoral map. Okay, so there's a map and to groups unfavorable. Okay, so they like take a map and the people they don't like, they're like moving them or something. So they're playing with the map. So notice how I don't necessarily have to understand every bit of it, but I'm starting to understand here that gerrymandering is when people in power are playing games, doing things to keep power. Now I'm understanding that they're playing with a map. Now we're going to have to activate a little bit of our prior knowledge here. Okay, so why would they want to play with the map? Well, the map represents who gets to vote for them. And if you didn't know this, now you know it, that little areas called districts have to have a representative, right, in Congress. And states get a certain amount of representatives. But if you didn't know all of that, you know that they're playing with a map to stay in power, right? We don't exactly know what they're doing, but we know they're moving around the map so they don't lose power. Figures 2A and 2B show how a governing political party can benefit from gerrymandering. Okay, so now they're going to tell us why it's a good thing for the people in power to do this, why it helps them. And it says in both figures, there are 40 gray squares and 60 white squares. This is a little hard because I changed the colors, but we get the idea. And the area is divided into 4 equal size districts. Okay, so maybe the map has districts. All right, put a question mark there. And they're supposed to be equal. Okay, so the map is supposed to be equal size. Well, that makes sense. People have to vote. Everybody has like an equal say. So equal size districts. And if you notice, I'm almost having like a conversation with myself. That's what you're supposed to do. This is called metacognition, right? So you're supposed to talk to yourself, ask yourself questions, try to answer. As I'm looking through, a lot of you are good at that. You're writing out what is going on in the text and the way you feel about it, right? So that's applying, that's text to self, that's metacognition. You're thinking about your thinking. That's what you have to do. I cannot guarantee, nobody can guarantee that every nonfiction text you get, that you're going to know about it. You could get something about like crickets and how they get eaten by spiders or something random, right? So this conversation I'm having with myself, I'm teaching myself. In figure 2A, the white square party will win only 2 seats out of 4. So in figure A, the white, okay. So I know that the map is showing how something's going to be unfair. The white square party will only win 2 seats out of 4. But in figure 2B, the white square party will take 3 of the 4 districts. What's that? As most of the gray votes are consolidated into one oddly shaped and geographically separated district. In fact, Illinois' 4th congressional district is similar in shape to the gray district. Okay. So I'm still kind of confused, but it sounds like they rearrange stuff in a way that helps them vote. Okay. Notice that I didn't get caught up with congressional district. I didn't get caught up with exactly understanding what the term gerrymandering meant. I didn't think about the term state, legislature, governing political party. I'm just looking at the overall main idea. They're playing games so that they can keep power. They're playing games with the maps, right? So moving the map to keep power. Now, this is something I do in real life. So it's not just something I tell my students to do when it comes to reading. I deal with lawyers on an everyday basis. I deal with real estate agents. I deal with all kinds of people that probably have a lot more knowledge on things that I do. So sometimes the most I'm going to get is like an overall idea of what I'm reading. And then I have to research some more. So this is a real skill to have. Like you're learning as you're reading, you're going back and thinking about how to bring this all together, right? So that's all I've gotten. Gerrymandering is like playing a game with maps so you can keep power. Any questions before we start looking at the rest of the questions? Anybody lost, confused so far?
No question.
Okay. And I really like yes, go ahead.
Excuse me, Mr. Mata.
Yes.
I will be leave a little bit early your class, okay?
Okay.
Because my boss called me to work, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Tomorrow, you guys.
Yep.
Thank you for your class, sir.
See you tomorrow. Yes. See you tomorrow. Okay. So I really like the notes that Mariana took, right? So on the side, I'm gonna read it on Spanish. I'm gonna translate it. Es la forma como los eso, la forma como políticamente se grafica los distritos que cada candidate tiene a su favor o en contra. Y así pueden estimar cuántos votos podrían tener y cuántos la oposición. So her notes in Spanish are basically saying something similar to what I said, that they use this to kind of predict who's going to vote for who, and they use that to like maintain power. That's not the actual definition of gerrymandering, but she still does very well, right? Because you're getting the idea that this is about keeping power and playing with where people live and what they count as, right? So that's another example of how, even when you don't know the exact definition, you can get the general idea and do well. Somebody else. Actually, I was actually going to bring up Andre. Um, oh, wrong page. And I'm just spending a lot of time on this before we get started because I know that this is going to be on the tests in several ways, and it's harder. Oh, yeah, this computer's so slow. Okay. And one of the things he highlighted was in order to favor the interests of the party in power of a state legislature. So he's already breaking that down, right? This is to give whoever's in power the ability to keep it. So if you look at question one, which of the following is the main point of the passage and figures? So Illinois' fourth congressional district has now been in existence for over 20 years. Nobody should have put A. That has, again, nothing to do with anything. That's throwing people off. C, gerrymandered congressional districts are a major threat to the democratic system. Well, I kind of think they're saying that, but they're not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. They're just saying people do it to keep power. They're not really judging anybody. So while C sounds like it could work, they're not saying it's a bad thing. They're just saying this is what people do, right? Okay. All right. Make sense?
Yes.
Which okay, so we know that it's not a threat. Let's look at B. Curiosity is the most important ingredient in the democratic process. Again, this has nothing to do with anything.
No.
All right. And then D, governing parties can use their power to shape electoral districts to their advantage. And that's the answer. The answer would be D. So even with what like Mariana wrote and other people highlighted, even if you don't understand state legislators, gerrymandering, governing political party, you understand people trying to take power. That's what they're really saying. They're not saying it's a good or bad thing. They're just saying, here's what people do. This is real, by the way. Gerrymandering is a real thing. So the answer would be D. Questions. Questions.
No question.
No question. No question. No question.
Okay. So let's look at number 2. Which of the following conclusions can be drawn from the passage and the figures? So now we need to say, based off what we read, what's going to make the most sense? You're going to get a lot of questions just like this. Okay. So let's look at A. Gerrymandering is more common in Illinois than in other American states. Again, nothing to do with anything. So no. All right. Through gerrymandering, impartial committees draw boundaries to keep elections fair. No. This is about people staying in power, right? I mean, if you're trying to keep power, there's no way for it to be fair, right? You're playing games to stay in power. Gerrymandering convinces citizens who would ordinarily be unfavorable to a party to change their votes. Is that what they're saying? This is going to get people to change their votes?
No.
No, this is about, again, playing games to stay in power. So the correct answer would be B. Through gerrymandering, a governing party can be elected to a greater number of seats and that's why they play the games. To a greater number of seats than its voter support might otherwise allow. Questions on number 2?
No question.
Okay,
Question.
perfect. And again, you may struggle through this. You may. Like, and I always say this, it's not unlike what it is in real life. Even when I deal with lawyers, doctors, whoever, I still go out and research and I struggle through what I read, right? Number 3, in what way do the figures support the passage? Okay, and now here's the hard part, especially because I had to fill in the colors myself. Okay, so we need to figure out how the graphs help us understand that this is a game that's unfair to people. Again, maybe I don't understand districts. I'm not really in this situation. I'm not a person who is aware of politics. The biggest difference I noticed between figure 2A and figure 2B is that figure 2A looks even. Looks like it's just split up in a way that every area is even. Figure 2B is weird and they're like keeping some things and moving around others. So I think if anyone's going to be playing a game, it's going to be the whatever's going on in 2B. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I heard from one person. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Not for me. I'm still confused.
Okay, there we go. Okay, where are you confused at?
The way that the answer is because for me the correct I choose the answer A because for me the graphics illustrate the advantage for each party can obtain to the party because we are asking about the government.
And you're exactly right. The answer is A.
Oh, okay, absolutely. I choose it.
Yeah, because if you think about it, we know that they're doing something that's unfair to stay in power, right? And we know they're playing games with a map, right? And again, I go back to this. Even if I only know one word out of that sentence, but I know the overall main idea is about voting and keeping power. If I had to look at a map and say, hey, which one is probably not going to be fair and going to allow me to stay in power, it would have to be figure 2B. Because figure 2A, that looks like it's even.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have to be an expert in politics to understand that figure 2B is like people just kind of making up boundaries so they can keep the people they like.
Okay, so I'm good. For a moment, I understood that the correct answer was letter B.
Sorry, say that again.
And then I am good. For a moment, I understood that the correct answer was B. Is why I.
Yeah. See, so it doesn't matter if you have a language barrier. It doesn't matter if you've never had any background knowledge on some of these things. What matters is just being able to infer and get the main idea, right? In what ways do the figures support the passage? Okay, so it is A because they can obtain through gerrymandering. Again, I don't necessarily know what gerrymandering is, right? I just know they're playing games to stay in power. So it's not going to be B. They predict victory for the Gray Party in the upcoming election. Well, that's not really what the whole main idea of this was, right? The main idea is it's an unfair way to keep power. They are more relevant to Chicago than to rural Illinois. Again, that has nothing to do with anything. There's always going to be one like that. They show that voter turnout will continue to decline if governing parties continue to gerrymander Well, no, this isn't about people turning out to vote. This is about shaping like where people vote, right? Like the
Yeah.
map, right? So C and D you could throw out fairly easy. So you should be between A and B, and A is going to make more sense. Questions about that?
No question.
No question.
No question.
Okay, good. So we're going to have a lot of these on the test. Even when it's not supposed to be a question with a related graph or chart or graphic, you'll still get some. So if there are no questions, that brings us to 11:59. And that's all she wrote. I will see everybody tomorrow. Again, please use Aztec so we can catch up. If you have any questions about Aztec, please take a screenshot and let me know.
Okay, thank you. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye.
You're very welcome. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
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 You are currently the only person in this conference.